Why do you feel that sexual assault has kind of become like a controversial issue nowadays?
So I think because it's just such a sensitive topic for a lot of people in general, they don't want to bring it up. And when people start bringing it up, they're put down constantly. And when so many more people are like put down, like in school systems or workplaces or relationships, they feel like, okay, I can't do anything.
Welcome back to Underage Thinking. Today is episode 10, and we have a very special guest, Thrisha Sentilnathan, who is the founder of We Rise Above, an organization that fights against sexual violence in the youth community.
Yeah, that's right. How are you today, Trisha?
Good. How are you?
We're good.
Good. So before we get right into it, we just wanted to ask you about We Rise Above as an organization. We know you started around, last summer. And it started off as a Girl Scout project. How did it become like so big? You know, you have like 3,500 followers, like so many ambassadors.
Actually, if you asked me like a month ago, we were at like 265 followers.
Really? So it just started.
It just like we started booming. Yeah. So it definitely did not have the same experience as I had like if you asked me like a month ago.
Right.
But honestly, I think it grew just because people started seeing like the injustice in our community and like the hole that we have in general and like how we need to fix that stigma around like high school communities and college communities in general just because it happens so much. Mm-hmm. So I think that's just when people started realizing, hey, like we actually have to start learning about this. We have to start fighting about this. And like people were becoming passionate about it and like more people wanted to get involved and they saw like the work we were doing on the side and everything that we were doing and all our projects and stuff. And they were like, I want to get involved too. So we just started getting more and more people following. And as more people were coming out with their stories, I'm guessing like around June and July-ish, people were kind of tagging us in their posts and talking about us. And they started gaining like momentum and people were starting to realize like, hey, this resource exists in our like society. Like I need to like follow the page. And that's kind of how it started.
That's amazing, actually. I remember one time someone posted on their story, it was like a little post, and I looked at it and I was like, oh shoot, this is like We Rise Above. Like I know who these people are. Like, people are like showing that there should be awareness because it's definitely.
I think in general, like the boom kind of happened with all these like social issues right after, Black Lives Matter and everybody, especially teenagers, start to realize like, okay, maybe we don't get a chance to vote in the next election, but like what can we do outside?
That's
and
true.
I think, what you're doing with We Rise Above is pretty special.
Could you just really quickly, like to anyone who hasn't heard of We Rise Above, just kind of give like a quick rundown of what you guys do, how you guys started?
Yeah, We Rise Above is basically an organization that implements programs in other schools and high schools and colleges. And we do things like awareness weeks and self-defense workshops. And we have people come do rallies and assemblies. And then we also go around to different people and like talk. And we do lots of different posts on social media. And then we put chapters in different schools, and then we have I go and talk at different rallies, and then we have a lot of ambassador programs and we have volunteer programs as well. And then we kind of do lots of projects on the side, which include like survivor donations, and then we also do podcasts and we have our own YouTube channel, and then we host a lot of online workshops and like scholarships and like lots of different things just to get the community involved and feel like, hey, like these people aren't like someone like random. Like I want to interact with them. Like I want to learn from them. Like
really
I want to be like that approachable type of side where people are not afraid to talk to us about different things. And we want to bring up these topics in our community and just kind of start to decrease the stigma around all these topics. And yeah.
So like, what would you say would be like the goal of this organization?
Well, I would really say the goal is to impact students and give them the education that they deserve in like high school and kind of get that education to them before they enter college or relationships or the workforce, and they kind of understand what to do in certain situations. So if they are put in a situation, because it's very, very common, whether not even in the United States, but in the world in general, they kind of get that, they know what to do, or they like identify like what happens, like, hey, okay, there's a difference between sexual harassment, there's a difference between sexual assault, like where am I supposed to go report a case? What are my resources? So like kind of just giving them that education that they should have been receiving earlier and giving it to them when they need it.
Now, you had a lot of different choices to like start your project, right? Like in terms of like Girl Scouts, it could have been something about the environment. It could have been something like that. But what specifically like drove you to start an organization that talks about this?
Well, my Goldor project was actually going to be
Goldor is from the Girl Scouts, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was actually going to work with Thirst Project and like build wells in Africa and like kind of do like water session. And then when I started to realize like I actually want to do something that's not already been done and kind of make something different that no one's seen before. And that's when I kind of sparked. The situation happened at that time of the Larry Nassar Olympic case.
Right.
And I realized like, hey, what if these girls had that education? Like, hey, I knew what to do exactly when I saw this happening. The situation may have been prolonged less time. Like someone could have brought something up if they had the education. They knew like the difference between a medical procedure and sexual assault. So I was like, if these girls could have got the education, then this could have prevented less like a longer time from happening. So I was like, I think we need to get these in high schools. I saw like not a lot of high schools are talking about this like in their health class. Maybe it was like there like 1 or 2 minutes probably like in a video. So I was like, I think we need to go in more depth because it happens so often, but like we're not talking about it. So I think that's just how it kind of started. And I was like, I think this is a great project that I could expand to even after and make it more sustainable and like go about it. So I think that's kind of how
I feel like it is. Like there's so many different facets to We Rise Above now, right?
Yeah.
Like, that blows my mind.
I think another question I have is like, I think we all know, and like you touched on, it's not really mentioned in our schools or in our common conversations. It's kind of a topic that we like avoid. You know
like,
what I'm saying?
Even us right now, like we kind of like are just like trying to avoid that. And I guess like you guys are trying to change that stigma, right?
And I think like my question is, it's a taboo topic. How did you bridge that gap and make it comfortable for these survivors to like speak out and like create that community? Because a lot of the times you might have the resources, but people just don't go and use them, you know? And how'd you make, We Rise Above so attractive to people?
Well, I think just because we're high school students and college students actually working with our community, I think it made a difference. Because if you look at it, we're actually the youngest student-led organization that focus on sexual harassment in the country itself. Wow. And so it has a different aspect to it compared to a lot of other organizations because a lot of, if you look at them, they're adult run. And I don't think they have that same connection as they do with the younger students, or they don't know how to appeal to people. And so when we're working with our ambassadors and our volunteers, we're trying to make things like appealing to younger students. For example, we do a lot of TikToks. I know a lot of people really like TikTok. So we kind of just make sure that we're constantly interacting with them. So for example, I think this month we had an ambassador take over our account every single day.
Right.
And people are like interacting with them and they're talking and they're answering questions. So they feel like we're not any different from them. We're just providing them that resource and that education to them, but we're still the same as them. And that's kind of the approach we're taking. And I think more people are kind of getting attracted to, and they're starting to look at what we're doing. And I think that's just the most important, like having a youth-to-youth connection is like the most important part. Because I think that's when you know how to like work with people and get content out that's something that they would want to read. So I think I also am able to see like, okay, is this something I want to read, or am I going to read it, or am I going to tap it on like the story or something?
Right.
True. Yeah.
And like, what's one moment, I guess, since you've started that you felt like, wow, I've like really made an impact? Like, what's that most like, maybe like talking to someone or seeing someone's story? Like, what really touched you that you were like, okay, I really need to like take this to the next level?
So when we did our first program at a school, actually after our self-defense seminar, a reporting case seminar happened, a girl came up with me. She lets me use her story as an example because she wants it to be used. And so she actually got her first job at a tutoring center. She worked from 5 to 12 a.m. and she was working at a tutoring center. And she started noticing that her boss was kind of taking advantage of her situation where she was just a young 16-year-old girl working alone with one guy in a room with no one else there. Yeah. And the guy started taking advantage and started kind of touching her a little bit everywhere around her shoulders, getting deeper and all those things. She came up to me, she was like, Trisha, is this normal? I think what I heard from yours is not normal. And I was like, yeah, it's not. Let's take about the steps, kind of approach everything right and like detail everything. And then it happened for about a week or so, and then she started getting more and more uncomfortable, and then that's when I was like, okay, let's try to report something. Let's get this like case like kind of solved so that you don't have to go through this uncomfortable situation anymore. And so I kind of helped her with the whole reporting process and how to do different things. And she got out of the situation, but turns out like I think 16 other girls were also sexually harassed by that same boss. And so I think that moment when I was able to show someone like to recognize something was like really great, because I saw that my program was making an impact on someone, not even if it was just hundreds of students, but that one person was like, hey, I'm making an impact. I want to keep going. So that's kind of the part that was like I want to go.
And I think what fascinates me is like, if I were to look at this from like an outside perspective, somebody going through this might think I need to go to someone who has like a certificate or a degree, but you're a high school student, like if we dumb it down, you're a high school student. But I mean, I guess how did you make yourself like so educated in terms of like, getting to a point where like people look up to you as someone equal or even better to approach than, let's say, a counselor?
So I actually worked with a lot of licensed organizations to become licensed. So
So you're licensed.
So like I can get victims like help and stuff like that, and like redirect them to the right places and show them like what exactly, give them advice on different things, and like kind of guide them in the right direction.
That's really cool. Yeah.
And so that's kind of why I think it's more comfortable when someone approaches someone their age and that knows what to do and runs an organization like this to know what to do. And so I think that's when people are like, okay, I think I can trust them. I know what to do. Or if I don't know what to do, then I will take it to another organization who works with us to help them with their situation.
That's really, are you the only person in We Rise Above that's certified, or do you have like your
so I'm the only person that is certified, but I personally sometimes just direct people to other organizations who are much more professional than me and are allowed to actually work one-on-one with the survivors.
That's really cool, actually.
Yeah.
That is actually
Is that like a long process
crazy.
or?
It's like a course that you have to take to go through the,
Wow.
Cool. So I have a quick question. So when you started this like foundation, this organization, you chose the name We Rise Above. Why'd you choose that name? Like what kind of told you like this would be a good name for a sexual harassment or sexual assault organization?
I honestly, I was like working on my gold award and I was trying to figure out like any name that kind of stood out to me, and I really just one day saw it and I was just like, it just came in a vision of mine. I was just like, okay, this is the name. This is what I want.
It makes sense.
I was like, yep, there we go. Yeah.
I love that.
Love it. Yeah, for sure. And I think there's a lot that we can talk about with your organization, but we kind of want to, segue into sexual assault and violence in general, because I think a lot of high schoolers, I think, like we've been saying, don't really know much about it.
I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions. I feel like, especially with like Hollywood and all these like TV, what's it called? All these like programs and stuff like that. I feel like there's a
like
very
they portray it in a way where it's like
exactly
they don't show these things.
And I feel like there's something to be said about not exactly like the full extreme of like what we imagine as sexual assault, but there's like definitely like what you said about like, just like the constant touching and like the stuff that made her uncomfortable that isn't really talked about. It's kind of just like, oh, that's the norm.
Yeah. So I would say like my question is first, like, what do you think has, what do you think is like the greatest like proponent or like perpetuator of, sexual assault like in our community? Like why because I mean, obviously men aren't raised to, do these things, but they end up doing these things. So what do you think, surrounding like whether that's education, how they were raised, like what factor do you think leads them to do that?
Well, honestly, a perpetrator can be really anyone. It doesn't have to be a man, or it doesn't have to be, it could be a girl or guy, or really just anyone in general.
Right.
And I just think it's just the mentality that's happening at that moment, like a sexual desire at that moment where it's a normal human thing that people go through, but sometimes just people can't control it in general. And I think that's just the point where they've been taught from a young age, like just a simple thing like tickling. Like if you're constantly tickling someone and someone just doesn't like it and you say no and they just keep going, that's a form of like, hey, you're like stepping my personal boundaries. And we're taught that from a young age where like people are like, okay, it's okay to go further when someone says stop. So I think just even those simple things, just even like tickling from a young age is something that people feel like, hey, it's just a joke, or it's like
they're just saying stop. It doesn't really mean.
It doesn't really mean anything. It's just something. So I think just little things that we're taught from a young age, like just recently, I think there's like toys where it's like inappropriate things, like even on cartoon shows, they like snip in little inappropriate things that go in there and like kids don't notice it, but it's still there. And I think there was just a recent toy that just got like called back because it was just inappropriate, where like if you like touch the underparts of the toy, like it makes random noises.
Oh,
and so,
I saw that.
Yeah, so like just those little things that like they throw in there as little, whether it's a toy or whether it's a TV show, like we're taught from a young age, and they see that and they grow up and they're just like, okay, it's okay, I can do that too. And so really it's just where you're coming from, what items you're using, the environment you're surrounding yourself from, and like whatever you're just there, like whoever teaches you things, I think that's what all kind of plays into everything of what a perpetrator kind of goes through in that moment of like what they're doing. And they don't really like think about the consequences that happen or who they're affecting or what's going to happen after. So I think that's just the main thing of like a perpetrator in a certain circumstance.
For sure.
And what would you say is like the biggest problem now? Because I feel like a lot of your viewers or like a lot of your followers are in high school.
Mhm.
What would you say is like the biggest problem now in high school? Like,
I think the biggest problem is when people don't know how to step from like stay inside their boundaries,
Right.
or they don't know how to respect someone else's boundaries, because like they may think like it's okay in their head, but like for someone else, like they might not show it outside that it's not okay. And I think that miscommunication between everything is kind of what spirals into what's happening. And I think just verbal communication in general is just really important between even just your friends, or if you're like your partner or someone. I think that's just the most important thing. But I think in high school in general is because we're in an environment where no one talks about anything, no one wants to bring it up or something, that everything is just miscommunicated. And like we have to start bringing those things up and make it clear, like the difference between respect, the difference between consent, like all those different types of things.
Sure.
And I think like within that, you also brought up something like pretty interesting and something that I slipped up on where I said just like men do it, you know, but there's also like a flip side to that where men are also victims.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think is like
Really
really overshadowed. Because
Yeah.
I mean, just being me or being like a man in general, it's something almost like society has deemed it as like kind of a weakness if you like kind of bring it up.
yeah. And
know?
yeah, I feel like honestly, me growing up, I kind of like reflect back on this now. Like, there's been a lot of movies or like shows that I've seen where like a guy has like a tutor, like an older tutor, and like stuff happens, and it's kind of like seen as like an accomplishment rather than something that should be like
Inappropriate.
yeah, inappropriate, exactly. And it's kind of like I never realized it growing up, like you said, because they're kind of like throwing it in here and there. But now looking back, I'm like, this is a real problem. Like no one's really talking about that, right?
Yeah. I mean, well, like it's just like I think what you said, like the men, like people, that's a really big misconception when I'm talking to people. They're like, oh, only men can like do this type of thing, but of
Right.
course not. Like it could literally be anyone. It does not matter. Same sex too. It really doesn't matter.
Right.
It could be anyone that just is in that situation and they're not really thinking beyond what's happening in that situation. And so I think that's something that is important to talk about, because a lot of people feel like, hey, I'm a guy, I was in a sexually violent relationship where I was being abused, and they're like, they have kind of a taboo around them, like, I can't come out with my story. There's a usual common thing where the guy's like, oh, didn't it feel good? Like, why are you like that? Like, so I think that's just something that people have that taboo on, and that's something you have to start getting rid of and just kind of laying it like it can happen to anyone, and we have to be careful of that, and like we have to start educating people on these things and kind of just telling them like what the step-by-step things are, like what the difference between everything is. And I think that's just the most important part, is just getting this education out there, because then people will just realize, okay, so it can happen to anyone. This is what's happening to me. I don't know what to do. This is how I report it. This is what happens after. So kind of just like a step-by-step process that they know what to do, and they've been given that education to do.
For sure.
So.
I agree.
And I think one of the things that like really, I guess, got people like, you know, more aware of the situation is the fact that people like Brock Turner, you know,
Mhm.
everybody did the right steps, right? They like reported it, they got to court, but what happened after wasn't justified, right? Like the justice was not served. They barely got a sentence. And I guess my question to you is, like, what should be the consequence, you know? And obviously it's pretty like a general thing because there's different cases, but for let's say a rape case or a sexual assault case, like what do you think should be the consequence that they like truly deserve? And like, why do you think they're not getting those punishments in the first place?
Well, personally, I think just the system in general is just a little bit messed up a little bit in the way that like how a victim is constantly told like, oh, we can't help you with this like situation.
Right.
Or like if they go to a police station, like it takes them 6 months to get to their case, like finally after reporting after such a long time. And so I just really think that like when something happens, like they have to have a separate department just for this type of violence, and like they don't have that, or they have like one person working on it. And I feel like if they have that separate department, then more people are going to come with their stories. They know that they're going to get help, and they know that their perpetrator can get with charges. And personally, I don't really know exactly what the exact charges like per each case should be, but I know for sure that a victim does deserve justice, or they do deserve to come out with their story and get help and get support, and also feel like they can get their life back, because definitely for a lot of victims, they feel like they're like that's it, like the road's over, or like I can't grow from this anymore, like this is something that's weighing down upon me. And I think that's something that like they would feel much more happy about, like getting that support that they deserve, or that justice that they can get like from these cases in general.
And feeling safe, honestly.
Yeah.
And I feel like, honestly, right now, sexual assault has just become such like a controversial issue when it really shouldn't be. I feel like there's a lot of like negative stigma around it. Why do you feel that sexual assault has kind of become like a controversial issue nowadays?
So I think because it's just such a sensitive topic for a lot of people in general, they don't want to bring it up. And when people start bringing it up, they're put down constantly. And when so many more people are like put down, like in school systems or workplaces or relationships, they feel like, okay, I can't do anything. And so when more and more cases start piling up and they start seeing like that same thing happening over and over again, they're like, well, what am I supposed to do? Like, they don't know exactly where to go. And that stigma is just created where like, okay, I'm not going to get help. No one's going to help me. I can't talk to it about anyone. People are going to look down upon me, or they're like, this situation is not going to go anywhere. And that's when like that stigma starts to build up and schools start not talking about it because it's just too sensitive, or it's a legal issue that goes into it and they don't want to bring it up. And so I think that's just where it starts going. When more and more starts happening, that stigma just keeps building and building. And that's what we're trying to break down slowly by bringing up these conversations in schools and like trying to get these topics out to students and they know that it exists. Because I think a lot of people before We Rise Above, they were like, I never even knew this existed. Like, I never knew this violence even existed in my own community. Yeah. And so I think that's when they started to realize like, okay, I think I need to be more educated on this topic.
For sure.
I feel like everyone kind of just feels like, especially with sexual assault, it's like, oh, it's not happening in my area. But what it really is, and I feel like, I don't know if you remember, like maybe like 1 month or 2 months ago, there was like a thing about FJUSD, and they were talking about it. And I was like, this is a real problem, like in our community. And I feel like people don't realize that it's happening near them, so they kind of like brush it off, just like you said.
Yeah.
What would you say is kind of like the stigma or kind of like the issue in Southern California? Because I feel like people don't really think about it, and then that just kind of like becomes a problem. So yeah, what would you say about that?
I would really say, like, I know what you're talking about, that district that kind of went through this issue, and I know there's a lot of other districts that were going through this issue in general, and I think that in Southern California, there's so many cases that are happening just in like LA County area or just in OC County area. And like people are not taking that into account. Like this type of violence occurs. I feel like a lot of people have it like, oh, it probably only occurs in the streets. Like, because personally, when I went to on my 8th grade East Coast trip and we were like in New York and we were walking down the streets, almost every single person that I met were like, I got catcalled. Like, wow. That's like, I think it's something that a lot of people think like, oh, it only happens in the streets, or it only happens in this area or with this group of people. Like, they don't realize that it could literally happen to anyone. And no one knows that because they're not taught that. And so I think that we should be really letting them know, like, it could be you any minute. Like, for example, like, if someone goes to the store like alone at nighttime, it can happen at that time too. There's a lot of different things going on. Like, oh, if this is near your car, like this is gonna happen. Like, be sure like what's around your car, or make sure you're looking underneath your car.
I know, I saw that too.
Those scare me. Yeah, I was like, whoa.
Underneath the car, like I was like, what?
Yeah, like it's like really crazy. Like people are like, oh, if a honey bottle is like flipped upside down near you, be careful. Or like there are like different things. Like if there's a receipt on your car, be careful. So there's like lots of different things that like people don't know about. But there's also false information being spread. Right. And so like you have to make sure like the right information is getting to different people. And like, because again, social media spreads a lot of different like false information sometimes, or false rumors. And that's something that I have to start breaking down like one by one. Like, this is the right information, spread this one, not this one, or don't make people scared for no reason. Like get them the right information and the right resources first.
And I think you said something like really important with the social media part of it. And I just wanted to ask you, like, I know there was a thing on social media where it was like one of the main like detractants towards like the hashtag Me Too movement or things like that were like false accusations. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And people kind of like took away from the actual like movement or the like awareness by like pointing to people who falsely accused and kind of derailed other people's lives. Now, do you think that's like overstated? Do you feel like that's just a distraction, or do you feel like maybe that's something we address? Like, I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah. So when people like falsely accuse someone, and then like that's when they're like, okay, she did like this happened, or like she did this, or like he did that, or like something like that. people are like, they want to make sure that this topic isn't brought in. They're bringing up the negative part of it, which also creates that negative stigma against survivors. Like, why am I sharing my story if this is going to happen?
Right.
And they feel like they don't want to share their story. And so when that happens, I think that they're trying to break down the movement like one by one and like break down like the wall of survivors who are there, who are willing to share their story and say, me too, like I went through this too. And so people are just really like, they want to kind of distract from that area and bring it to the negative portion instead of bringing up these survivors who went through something so traumatic that affects them for the rest of their life. Like, I think I actually just met a survivor today. We were working on one of our podcast segments with her today, and she said she herself said, like, I was part of the Me Too movement, but there was also a lot of negative sides of the Me Too movement because a lot of people were coming for like different survivors who believe like, oh, their situation wasn't worse as this person. And so like there's like a lot of taboos, but again, it's like you just have to make sure like survivors are getting that support that they need because it is a traumatic experience. And like it's important that we kind of bring up these people, but also educate people who haven't gone through these situations so we can reduce all these situations. Because if we stop talking about it, the cycle just keeps repeating itself over and over again. And like there's nothing we can do about it. So I think that's why what We Rise Above does is kind of to educate both the students, but also bring up survivors to educate even more people and like prevent these situations from happening in the future.
Awesome. And I think one of the common threads that you've been saying is education.
Yeah.
Like educate people starting young, like literally with the tickling example within school and all of that. So I think, I guess one of the environments that we all are packed into is school. And I feel like a lot of cases occur from that environment, you know? And I was wondering, like, what steps or solutions outside from these organizations that provide awesome resources, what do you think, like, systematically these schools can do to educate, you know, their students, and also maybe even talk about things like the dress code and why that is, you know, a negative aspect and why that can perpetuate the cycle as well?
Yeah, well, dress code is just a huge issue in schools just because people feel like, oh, because she's wearing off the top shoulders, it's distracting. But in real life, it's just what you're taught. Like, just look forward, look straight. Like, there's no distraction near you. It shouldn't be a distraction. Like, wearing one hole in like your ripped jeans shouldn't be a distraction for someone. That's just what you're taught, or like you can't control yourself, and that's something that people have to learn. Like, is to control yourself and to kind of just make sure like, hey, you're here to interact with your friends and to have fun. Don't make someone else uncomfortable by looking at them up and down or catcalling them just because of what they're wearing. And so at schools, we kind of foster this environment of like false security. And like, it's important that like we kind of keep our eyes like around, because there's lots of things of like people going through different issues with different people in school. And so that's something that like we have to start breaking down, because like whenever we bring something up, someone wants to bring it down by like bringing up their own friends from their situation or like falsely justifying someone else's situation. And so there's always this constant like back to back, like, hey, like, I'm better than you, or like, hey, like that didn't happen, or like there's constant like back and forth like talking between everyone. And so I think that's just something that like is important, that we have to start bringing other ones up, and also giving everyone like that like space of like respect and like consent, and just have like a good time while going to school. Like, it should be somewhere like we should be happy to go to and safe to go to, and not feel like we're bringing like down, or it's a competition all the time.
Just quickly going back, I know you talked about how it's really important that survivors feel safe after the incident and that they feel that they get justice or whatever. But I know a lot of people aren't really confident, or like are still too scared to still talk about it or like talk about their stories. So what would you say is like the best thing that survivors can do if they don't feel like talking about it or don't want to, how would you say?
I guess like don't feel comfortable at this point in time. Maybe they'll do it in the future, maybe like years down the line, because that happens.
Yeah.
But maybe at this point, how to like cope with it.
Yeah, my question is like, how do they move? How would you say, because you've dealt with a lot of like survivors, how would you say they can move on and like live their life?
I mean, well, survivors can come out with their story like anytime, maybe 10 years, 15 years, 16 years, or even a month or a week after. It really depends on the survivor, because it really depends on like their mental health, when they're safe, when they know their resources. And I think that's just something important that survivors should also know, where take your time, don't rush anything, take time to breathe, take time to relax, and kind of like look back at the situation, like, where should I go about this? And I think that's something important. A lot of people have a taboo on that as well itself, where people feel like why is she coming out with their story? Why is he coming out with their story like a year later? Like that doesn't make sense. Like why would you talk about this a year later? Like you should only talk about a week now. But if that was you in your own situation, you were put in those shoes, would you want someone to force you to come out a week after your situation? So that's something that people have to think about. Like they can say that, but when they get put in that shoes, are they going to come out like a month later? I think that's something that is important to talk about. Like they can take as much time as they need to, and we should also be supporting them, and survivors should be getting that support that they need through like maybe TikTok. I don't know, that's something that a lot of people like feel relatable to, where they can relate to a different community that has gone through these same issues, or that they go through the same type of daily life things like school or all those things. Or if there's lots of resources, like do one thing that you like something every single day, or go out on a walk, or something like where they can get mental health support through that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really great.
And I wanted to also speak to the fact that like we provided solutions for that. And I want to talk about if somebody were to come up to, let's say, one of us, right, with their story, what's the best course of action for somebody who might not know a lot about, sexual violence, or might not know what to say in that moment?
So I would definitely say don't be overwhelming. Just say like, hey, I listen to you, I hear you, I believe you, I support you. Don't overwhelm them. Don't tell them like, hey, I can get you help like right now. Like kind of just let them, if they want help, they'll ask you for help for sure. So don't force them to do anything. I think that's something that a lot of people do, or they're like, hey, I'm here constantly bugging someone. I think it's just really important that like you let them breathe. If they want to come talk to you, they come talk to you with your situation. Don't overwhelm them. Don't force them. There's just been a lot of situations where survivors are getting overwhelmed by people to come out with their story, or push them out, or like, and I think that's like important that we kind of bring upon people as well. Like these people, like survivors, want to take their time, and they shouldn't feel like rushed or through anything. And so you should really just say like, hey, I understand you, and I believe you, and I hear you, and I see you, and if you ever need help, please let me know, and I can get someone to help you. And I think that's just the most important part, really, is just letting them know like you're supporting them, and if they want to come, they'll come to you.
Wow, man, we've gotten a lot of information, a lot of wisdom. I guess my question to you is to like wrap it all up. 5, 10, 15 years down the line, where do you see yourself? Where do you see We Rise Above? Where do you see the general situation? Do you think it's going to get better? Do you think it's going to get worse as time moves on?
I think as a Gen Z, like we kind of take action against things, and we kind of actually try to make change, and we try to bring these taboo topics up and try to normalize things. And I think as like we get older, like we're going to start to teach our kids like the difference between everything, and kind of instill those values from little ages. And also I think what I see myself doing personally is that I want to work with sexual assault victims. I've become so passionate about it, but I also want to pursue a field in the medicine career. So I think something what I want to do is become an OBGYN. So I work with sexual assault victims as well, and also do research with them, and also work with like the medical field that I want to work at. And so I think that's something that I personally will see myself doing. And as We Rise Above is growing, like we've gone nationwide as of right now.
Really?
And so, yeah, I think that's something that like a lot of schools are probably going to start taking up, because it is like one of the first programs that like schools can actually take and implement in their own school. And so when schools start to take this, I think this is going to become a nationwide thing. And I think people are actually going to put these in their schools. And as already the impact that it's made already, that people are going to notice, like, I think we can like get this topic like less stigmatized in our community, and try to get more people these resources, and maybe create a department in schools and police departments, and just for this type of violence, because it occurs so often, and that's just really sad. But we also have to make sure we're taking steps to prevent these things at the same time. So yeah.
When you blow up, don't forget us, because I think it's gonna be big. You already have people in like ambassadors in college, right? Yeah,
so we have lots of we actually have a lot of board members in college, but then we also have a lot of ambassadors in college, a lot of volunteers in college. We're partnered with a lot of schools and a lot of organizations as well, and a lot of influencers as well. And so I think as like it's just going to get growing, like more people are going to feel comfortable getting involved and wanting to spread awareness. And I think that's just the most important part as well.
Amazing. Currently doing like you're selling items like that, or is that
yeah, so we're doing a lot of things like we're actually going to make like WR like specific self-defense keychains. So we just did our pre-order, and it went really, really well. I think like 70 or 80 keychains were bought within like 4 days.
Wow.
And so we're going to be launching them again like very soon, like 24/7. And so that's something. And we're coming out with the book soon, I think at the end of like September, I think.
Did you write it?
Our group of people wrote it actually.
Cool.
And yeah, and a lot of survivors wrote their stories and wanted it in the book as well.
Wow.
And so they're coming out with the book soon, and we're coming out with a lot of. We have our online clothing shop.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
like whoever buys anything like that from the clothing shop, all the proceeds are donated back to the community, back to schools, and back to survivor shelters.
Oh wow. So do you guys like have a good amount of like income coming in from like all these?
Yeah, so we do a lot of fundraising through all these like shops and like products and collections and all those things, and everything is just directly put back into the community. So We Rise Above doesn't really use any of it. We actually just put it directly back into the
Okay.
community.
Wow.
Awesome.
And then where can people find you? Maybe on Instagram, your shop, do you have a website or anything?
All of our platforms are We Rise Above official. Every single one of them are We Rise.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We learned a lot, and I think I hope the audience learned a lot too.
We
So
should definitely do this again because I feel like there's a lot more that we can like cover in the future.
for
Yeah.
sure. All right.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was great. Peace.